Hello, CAQH CORE participants. A good afternoon for some of you, and for some of you on the West Coast, good morning. We're happy to spend some time with you today to talk to you about our goals and core priorities for the next year. If we go on to the next slide, I'd like to point out a few logistical items. The first is we're going to go through this webinar fairly quickly. So if you do want to refer to the slides, we'll be sending them to you either later today or Monday morning. In addition, if you have questions, please submit them at any time using the dashboard that you see on your upper right-hand corner, and we'll take questions at the end of the webinar. Next slide. We have a lot of information to cover with you today. As you can see, we're going to go through our goals and then do some highlights of some key projects, and then we'll end the webinar focused on some of our rule development focus areas. Next slide. I'd like to introduce CAQH CORE Director Erin Weber for our next segment.
Thanks, Jessica. And as Jessica mentioned, we have a lot of content today. And as all of you know, our core slides are always very thorough. So we may not touch upon every bullet that's on each slide, but if you see something, don't hesitate to follow up with a question after the fact. This slide gives an overview of our goals for 2020. These goals are developed and approved by the CAQH CORE Board of Directors. If you're curious who's on the board, that is always listed and updated on our website, so you can go there to see who our board members are. They represent plans, providers, and vendors, as well as advisors from key organizations. This year, we're going to be focusing on further evolving our model and improving our processes related to rule writing certification and industry relations, and we'll touch on some examples of that in today's presentation. We always have a second goal related to certification, ensuring that the rules are being adopted and used by the industry to ensure value across the industry. And we have some new efforts going on in that area as well this year. And then finally, the third goal is to continue to successfully serve as a national operating rule author. And our focus this year is really on the alignment of clinical and administrative data exchange through several business processes, including prior authorization, attachments, value-based payments, and connectivity, all of which you'll hear more about in this session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Tenike, who is going to talk through our most recent achievement at CAQH CORE, and thanks to all of you who were engaged in that, the update to the Phase IV Prior Authorization Infrastructure Rule. Emily?
Thanks, Erin. As many of you know, the initial Phase IV Prior Authorization Rule established a maximum time frame for the return of an initial 278 request, and this could include an approval, a denial, or a pend. The existing rule didn't apply to timeframes for that subsequent 278 response, but it did represent a first step to setting national expectations for the completion of a prior authorization request. So when considering potential enhancements to this Phase 4 PA rule, an analysis of both national and state level prior authorization response time requirements revealed that while many states have time requirements in place, ranging anywhere from 2 days to 15 days for non-urgent and non-emergent PAs, those definitions, response timeframes, and the scope continue to lead to variability, inconsistencies, and loss of frustrations, which was echoed by many of you, the core participants, and across the industry. So 3 key enhancements were made to the Phase 4 Prior Authorization Rule to address these inconsistencies and provide some greater uniformity for the sending and receiving of prior authorizations that are not emergent and not urgent. Many of you were involved in the update process and know that there was a lot of discussion and feedback involved in the development of these enhancements. They truly represent collaboration and compromise across the industry to improve the timeliness of the receiving a prior authorization, especially for final determinations. So the first requirement establishes a maximum response time frame for health plans to review a 278 request and respond with either a final determination or with what additional information or documentation is needed to complete that request. And these timeframes do differ for real-time and batch processing modes. The next requirement establishes a maximum time frame for a final determination to be sent via 278 response within 2 business days from the time all additional information and documentation is received from the provider. This requirement applies to both the batch and real-time processing modes. And finally, there was an enhancement for an optional requirement that provides health plans the opportunity to close out a pending 278 request after 15 business days if a provider does not respond with the requested additional information documentation necessary to make that final determination. Again, this is an optional requirement. And to allow for flexibility in those most complex 278 requests, the maximum response timeframes established in the first 2 requirements only need to be supported in 90% of cases per calendar month. There was also significant discussion throughout the rule update process on the scope of the enhancements. And after several rounds of feedback and workgroup discussions, the group decided that the new and updated response time requirements would not apply to urgent, emergent, or appeal prior authorizations. These use cases typically follow a different workflow than the non-urgent and non-emergent requests because they're typically conducted retroactively. Core participants will consider the urgent use case for future rule development or pilot inclusion in the future, though. And I'll now hand it back to Erin to review the prior authorization operating rule package for NCVHS and HHS consideration. Erin?
Thanks, Emily. As you all know, we've spent the last couple of years really focused on understanding the challenges of prior authorization and how we can move that to a more automated process. Out of that has come both the Phase 5 rule set as well as the Phase 4 update that Emily just reviewed. Our board met earlier this year and agreed to send a package of prior authorization and connectivity operating rules to NCVHS for recommendation to the HHS Secretary for National Adoption under HIPAA. That rule package includes the Phase 5 Prior Authorization Data Content Rule for the 278, the Phase 4 Prior Authorization Infrastructure Rule for the 278, including the update that Emily just mentioned, as well as the Phase 4 Connectivity Rule with a request to apply those connectivity requirements not just within the prior auth infrastructure rule where it already is included, but also to the eligibility, claim status, and ERA transactions, which currently use the Phase 2 connectivity rule per the federal mandate. So this brings greater automation of PA but more robust value to the 278 transaction, as well as enabling a single connectivity method to be applied across all of the business process transactions that the operating rules are supporting. We'll talk more about longer term goals for connectivity as well. The CAQH board selected this rule package given that it addresses some immediate business needs by enabling greater automation and consistency with connectivity, but it also sets the stage for some of the future rule development work we'll be doing to enable greater convergence of administrative and clinical transactions, as well as support and consideration for emerging standards. Your support and engagement in this process, working with NCVHS, will be critical along with the board, which is very committed to ensuring these rules are well vetted and considered for federal mandate. With that, I'm going to move to another key update. We have instituted, this goes back to our goal number 1, trying to improve our processes and our structures. The board has elected to restructure the operating rules, moving away from our traditional phase-based rule set to rule sets based on business transaction. This creates a more flexible framework for adding new rule requirements and updating existing rules, as well as removing outdated requirements for each business transaction. It will enable organizations to implement a rule set and not be dependent on their achievement of previous phases. as well as creating further support for having a uniform connectivity rule applied across all of the transactions. So when you think about the phases we currently have, we have 5 phases of rules. Our next phase would be phase 6. It's an unsustainable model to consider. Maybe in 5 years we might be at phase 20. Right now we're starting to have rule sets that have different transactions across different phases, and it will be much more logical, and I'll lay this out in the next slide. If we go back one slide, yeah, you can see right here we have right now rules kind of across the different phases for the same transaction, as well as multiple transactions within the same phase. In the next model, our new business transaction-based model, we will have a set of eligibility rules. We will have a set of claim status rules, and organizations will become certified in that business transaction. So they will be core certified on the prior authorization rule set. Some of the considerations that were made as the board considered this transaction was to ensure that we had clear coordination with CMS to ensure the communications related to the federally mandated rules. So we are working with CMS on that. The decision was also made to include both mandated and non-mandated operating rules within the same rule set, and for certification, organizations would need to conform to all the rules within a certain rule set, not just federally mandated rules. We've also considered the relationship to recertification, which my colleague Taha will talk about in a minute, to ensure organizations are adopting the most recent requirements within a rule set. We are really excited about this. This is something we've been thinking about and talking about with you all for a long time. And I think it will just really set us up to have a really clear, consistent structure that will enable us to make more quick, more rapid changes, but also more valuable changes to the rule sets moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Taha to talk a little bit more about recertification.
Thank you, Erin. So kind of as Erin mentioned, one of the key enhancements that we're making to the certification program this year is adding in requirements for recertification. And this will kind of start for anyone new coming into the certification pipeline in 2020. And kind of we believe, with rationale as to why recertifications are important. There's evolving technology, mergers and acquisitions, system upgrades that all are ongoing across the industry, and we believe recertification will help maintain integrity and address industry needs and challenges with interoperability, ensuring that systems are compliant over time. So in building the recertification program, CORE held a multi-stakeholder focus group to really gather insights from CORE certified organizations on what are some of the key policy decisions to be applied for recertification. And I'd like to just spend a brief amount of time kind of reviewing what some of these policy decisions are. So first most, CORE certified organizations will have to engage in the recertification process every 4 years. Renewals will have to be completed within a calendar year, and organizations will have 6 months to complete their recertification prior to us engaging in any sort of decertification. To help kind of align and reduce industry burden on recertification, we're hoping to engage with organizations and recertify across all the phases of the operating rules that somebody's certified on. And we are committed to reducing the number of testing requirements needed to ensure that all certification can be completed in a timely manner across all the different transactions. And as operating rules are updated and new versions are published over time, organizations will be expected to implement these new requirements or updated requirements as part of the recertification cycle. And we will have make sure that there's plenty of time for implementation. We've put together a 24 implementation period to ensure organizations have time to put those updates into their systems. We plan to reach out to all the CORE certified organizations in Q2 to kind of review specific scenarios related to your certification, and we'll discuss what the recertification policies mean, what the impact is, talk about process and timelines in Q2. So you'll expect an email from the CORE team sometime in Q2. And with that, I will hand the call back over to Erin to kind of talk about our rule development areas and focus for 2020.
Thanks, Taha. As you all know, the transition from phase to transactions and the addition of recertification will really help us remain relevant and up-to-date in our operating rule requirements, as well as implementations across the industry. Speaking of up-to-date requirements and new requirements, we are going to be doing a lot of rule writing in 2020. We are really focusing on interoperability, alignment of clinical and administrative transactions, and with that, we are specifically focused on eligibility and prior authorization to ensure that this alignment is beginning at the start of the revenue cycle. Our rules this year are focusing on making sure the provider has the right information as quickly as possible to ensure accurate care delivery and coordination. So we already are looking at operating roles within value-based payments. That subgroup is active, and we'll talk a little bit more about the potential rule requirements that are being developed in that group. And then our team will also talk through the connectivity, prior authorizations, and attachments work that all kind of is dependent on each other to achieve some of these goals that we've talked about. So with that, I will go into detail on the value-based payment initiative. As you all, I'm sure, recall, last year we conducted an advisory group to really help us prioritize some of the opportunity areas that were identified in the value-based payment report that we put out in 2018. 5 key areas were prioritized by that group. 2 of which really align with some of our existing work efforts, including need for additional documentation, notification to providers, as well as the standardization of the exchange of additional documentation. So a lot of that work is going to be happening within our attachments work stream, but thinking about use cases around value-based payments. Right now, the subgroup is developing potential rule requirements to exchange patient-provider attribution status information at the time of eligibility check. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll see that we're really looking at 3 sets of requirements within this rule development process. The first is data content requirements, looking at what information would be needed to share attribution information between a provider and a plan. What needs to be in the request, what needs to be in the response for that information to be of value. Similarly, what infrastructure is required to support that information exchange? What expectations for how and when that information exchange are needed? And then thinking about what's the right exchange format and mechanism, which standards should be used to exchange this information if we're doing this at the point of eligibility. So the group is really working through these challenges now. The subgroup is actually chaired by one of our board members, Troy Smith, who is the VP of Healthcare Payment Strategy and Transformation at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, as well as the Director of the Care Management Organization at Montefiore Medical Center. So there's really strong leadership. The group had a call yesterday with a ton of discussion and feedback and really digging into some of the challenges of this work effort. Additionally, later this year, we anticipate launching a pilot around the sharing of certain code sets in the claim potentially that will help support value-based payment. So stay tuned for more information on that as well. So now I will turn it over to my colleague Rachel Goldstein to talk about some of our work with prior authorization, connectivity, and attachments along with Taha.
Thanks, Erin. So today we're going to do a little bit of a spotlight on how these 3 work efforts, which certainly stand on their own as well, intersect in 2020. Here you'll see a visual of our prior authorization approach in terms of how we're thinking about how operating rules can help accelerate automation for prior auth and reduce burden. Number 1 and number 2, which relate to enhancing data content and establishing consistent timeframes for responses, you'll notice that we certainly have already developed rule requirements for those 2, and those set a really, really nice foundation for the other kind of prongs of this approach, some of which already have baseline requirements as well. So we'll go into each of those in a little bit of detail. So our approach in general is informed, obviously, by our years of research we've done on barriers to prior auth automation in general. And some of those barriers are listed here. I just want to call out a few for you that are very relevant to this discussion. The lack of consistent data content, lack of direction on how to request and exchange additional clinical information or attachments, and also the varying implementations of different connectivity approaches, which makes interoperability at scale a challenge. These are some of the top barriers that we've heard over and over, and these are ones that certainly we look to help resolve with our operating rules, some of which have already been developed, some of which are being updated, and some of which are new. This slide is the status of our rules. So we've broken it out into what's existing. Those are our Phase 4 and 5 rules, including the most recent update to Phase 4, which you're familiar with, and then rules that are under consideration, including potential requirements that will be explored this year by our connectivity and attachment subgroups, and also with our pilot initiative, which looks to measure impact of existing rules, identify opportunities for potential new rules, and so forth. I won't go into detail here, but certainly know that this is a good leave behind just to have a cheat sheet of what's available and what's coming. So here, for the first two prongs of our approach, enhancing data content and establishing national timeframes, as you know, these rules are already available for industry implementation. Enhancing the data content on the PA request, which we did in Phase 5, does allow for that quicker turnaround of a response, which then makes it possible for plans to respond in consistent, more timely windows, hence what Emily was talking about with our most recent Phase 4 update. This is what makes the recent update possible. Next, Taha will go into the third and fourth prongs of our approach and talk about how the connectivity requirement, potential connectivity requirements will also make it easier to do prior auth electronically at scale.
All right, thank you, Rachel. So in looking at connectivity and as CORE looks forward to kind of develop rules in the future, and also looking at prior rules on how do we support data exchange, addressing connectivity is a really important topic. As connectivity is essential for interoperability to occur, and as it enables organizations to access, collect, share, and utilize data within and across enterprises. So the visual on this slide represents an end-to-end interoperable data exchange with the focus being on kind of that foundational level of interoperability and where that connectivity layer really fits in. So we've kind of identified kind of how CORE connectivity can help build a more connected healthcare ecosystem. And on the slide, you can see, there's base requirements and tiered options. And, what our end goal is to really promote a industry safe harbor. And an example of this is, we could establish base requirements that really facilitate the transport and security of data exchange, and really think about how we can then leave room for flexibility to accommodate, lots of varying use cases and guiding different interactions, such as the use of, X12 transactions when we're looking at attachments getting into FHIR. So there's lots of different ways you can exchange data, but then thinking about adding room for flexibility beyond a strict safe harbor. So those are examples of how do we think about and promoting that end-to-end interoperable data exchange. And CORE connectivity is already an established method for data exchange in the industry. And by building upon the set of existing requirements and through a tiered approach, we think a future rule has the potential to address many of the challenges that are occurring with foundational interoperability. So on the next slide, today in healthcare, there are lots of different connectivity methods that are really used to facilitate the exchange of administrative and clinical data. And as we're looking to address the industry need to align on a common set of communication protocols, To date, CORE has already published 3 phases of connectivity rules, and we're really looking to unify and simplify how connectivity is addressed across operating rules and transactions. And Aaron kind of talked about the phases for transactions. How do we then consolidate and consolidate rules to that? And also in response to a lot of the industry interest and topics around interoperability. So with the ONC interoperability rules, and also with the work with HL7 Fire, we see there's a need to update some of our connectivity requirements to address some of those transactions. So as you can see on the slide, we are looking to launch a connectivity and security work group sometime next month to really examine and address what the potential connectivity rule updates could be. And part of this is building on the set of existing requirements and creating more of a flexible framework. And I talked about through some of the tiered options earlier. And then also looking at, at adding in some newer connectivity methods that could be a potential safe harbor for the future, such as the use of REST, APIs, FHIR. And again, we definitely want to align with the activity going on in the industry, such as with the interoperability rules that are being proposed by CMS and ONC. So more to come, and we're really looking to launch. We're looking to launch that connectivity and security work group next month. If you're interested in joining, please let us know. So a lot of exciting work. And I think, back to me again. So kind of looking at attachment. So another key work area that kind of Aaron highlighted for us is developing attachment rules for 2020. And I wanted to highlight, that CAQH CORE is the designated author for operating rules, including attachments, and we're really committed to supporting and accelerating that industry adoption for attachments with or without a standard. And I wanted to highlight one of the key work efforts that was completed in 2019, which was a scoping of potential operating rules for attachments that was addressed by the Attachments Advisory Group. And through the work of our advisory group, we went through a comprehensive review of attachment operating opportunity areas and went through extensive discussion, prioritization, voting, and defining, what are the big categories, or what are some of the categories that an attachment subgroup could focus on for potential operating goals. And as you can see, if you look at steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, that rigorous process from starting, if you look at number 2, we started off 20 different opportunity areas and then narrowed that down to 15, and then kind of prioritized which of those use cases could apply to. So really did a lot of work to really define what the industry need and where the industry direction should be going for potential attachment operating goals. So on the next slide, you can see this is kind of the formulation and the summary of the work from the advisory group. And these are really topic areas that CORE will engage in 2020 on our attachments initiative. So looking at, looking at the attachment subgroup and kind of what that work effort will look like, there are 3 key areas that the advisory group really defined as far as what we should pursue and move forward for operating rule development. And those 3 areas are exchange formats, which address the use of the transactions such as the 275, FHIR, infrastructure, and also data variability. So looking at reassociation of how attachment should be reassociated to a companion transaction. Then if you look at the next topic that the advisory group recommended was continuing industry education on attachment workflows. So what are some of the best practices and guidelines to guide attachments from point A to point B? And we'll have more education on that. And then the other areas, I talked about some of the connectivity work group that activities will be going on, and Aaron kind of talked about some of the BPP initiatives. So we're looking at how we can align some of our attachment opportunities to the work being done by those other work groups. And then there are additional areas that will also that have been identified for additional research that are kind of on the slide. I won't spend too much time into detail, but we're looking into researching a lot of these newer areas that have been expressed by industry, and we'll definitely reach out to participants for support on this. And we are planning to launch our attachment subgroup focusing on the prior authorization use case in Q2 to really talk about those opportunity areas that we've decided to move forward with. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to talk about pilots.
Thanks, Taha. And I know the work that attachment subgroup will do for the prior authorization use case will layer in a lot of value to kind of promote electronic adoption of PA and kind of meet some of those gaps as well. So last but not least for our spotlight on our kind of 5-pronged approach here relates to our pilot initiative. This initiative allows us to partner with industry organizations to measure the impact of prior authorization related operating rules and corresponding standards, and allows for real-world exploration of potential new rules. The impact information will support potential recommendations for national implementation to NCVHS and HHS. And there are a couple of different ways that as an industry organization that is an implementer and utilizer of prior authorization in general that you can engage in this pilot initiative. Essentially, we work with industry organizations to kind of match trading partners together, or you can come to us with an already kind of with a trading partner pilot grouping in mind. And option 1 here is to work to measure the impact of an existing project that you already have within your organization, whether it's a pilot project that you're already doing on a new implementation to improve prior auth, or something different, but it's existing and you're looking for less kind of guidance on setting something up that you would want to test and measure. We come in, we work with you to take a look at where the operating rules already apply and provide our research and measurement expertise and operating rule technical expertise to assist you in articulating the impact of that project. The second option is really to kind of come with a little bit of a blanker slate. You probably have some ideas, you know you want to do something, you're interested in leveraging standards and operating rules to improve your prior authorization process, but you're starting from kind of less of a predefined project roadmap space. We certainly are working with a couple of pilot organization groupings in this category, and that is definitely an option to participate with us as well. So we do have a couple different pilot groupings already in flight where we're starting to help them really kind of articulate what their measurement approach is, isolate where the standards and operating rules come in so that we can really understand those findings later on. However, we are still open and looking for organizations that are interested in partnering with CAQH CORE on this. And again, all of this really informs enhancing current operating rules, ideas for new operating rules, and what can kind of be then drafted and updated and brought back out for national implementation. This slide is a visual of kind of the myriad of options for getting through the PA process, and it's really more of a food for thought slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but to get through the prior authorization process electronically with standards and operating rules, this is kind of all the different paths it could take, both using existing standards and operating rules and potentially new operating rules and emerging standards. So this is just kind of a picture just to kind of spur some ideas and thoughts. We've had organizations come to us and say it's been really helpful because they've found it really validating in some of the work that they're already piloting within their own organizations, and then they kind of want to work with us to layer in some organized measurement and tracking component. So we know folks have really found this helpful. Here we can take a look sort of from a roadmap perspective on how moving into, we're now in 2020, looking at this year and also what we've done in the past few years, how does it all fit together? Kind of what we've just spoken to you about with PA attachments and connectivity. So this is our timeline. Really the vision here is that our operating rules and corresponding standards address the prior authorization process, close those critical automation gaps, support interoperability, and really come from a perspective knowing that industry organizations are at varying levels of adoption on standards and technology curve. So we will now turn to how you can engage with us to achieve this vision. So this brings us to the end of our spotlight on the intersection of some of these work efforts, and Jessica is going to talk to us about how, as participating organizations, you can engage with us to tactically achieve these visions.
Thank you, Rachel. If we can go on to the next slide. I know a lot of you already engage with us and are very active with our work groups, and we've talked to you today about our various initiatives and work groups. We wanted to put together a slide that had all the information collected. And as you can see here, we've got 3 work groups that are active and 2 that are upcoming. So if you have a certain expertise or area of interest and you'd like to engage with us on that, please contact us. And also a little bit further along, we will be collecting information from you via polling that will help us reach out to you. We could go on to the next slide. We wanted to point out that we are looking for a certain level of subject matter expertise as well as executive sponsorship from you for some of these initiatives, and we wanted to just kind of lay it out here for you. Subject matter expertise is obvious. I mean, we need your support and your engagement to make our efforts successful. And then the executive sponsorship is something that is somewhat new, and I think we started it last year. And I think it's so that those of you that decide that you want to be participating with us in some of these efforts have the support of your organization behind you, particularly if you're taking a long period of time working with us on some of these efforts. So as you can see at the bottom of that slide, we'd like you to complete a form by February 12th if you are interested in joining some of these work groups on connectivity and attachments. And if you have any questions or want to know how you can get involved, please contact us. And that leads us to our polling question here. Let's go ahead and launch that. I know a lot of you already work with us on these efforts, so please you don't need to respond if you're already active with us. But if there's an area here that you'd like to work with us on, please indicate that on the poll and we'll connect with you later on to get some more information. I'd like to keep this poll open for a little bit just to give people the opportunity to respond. And while we're waiting, is there something that I should have mentioned on the executive sponsorship that maybe I failed to say, or just to give people some time to respond, or did I hit the highlights?
I think you hit the highlights, Jessica. On the forms that you'll see, and this is aligned with kind of when we do call for participants for new groups, you'll notice that you can sign up. Maybe you're the subject matter expert within your own organization that is, signing up, let's say, for the connectivity and security group. And there will also be a field within the form to indicate an executive sponsor from your organization. Also, primary representatives from our participating organizations can certainly kind of recommend and encourage folks within their organization to sign up either as a subject matter expert or an executive sponsor. So let's say, for example, you're a primary representative from your organization and a senior level leader within your organization who would be interested in some of these work efforts but wouldn't be the person to actually participate in the group. You could approach that person to potentially serve as an executive sponsor and work together to identify an associated subject matter expert that would be attending the calls and contributing to the topic.
Thank you, Rachel. Super helpful. And I think this has given us some time to get a good chunk of our participants to respond to the poll. So thank you so much, and look forward. You'll be hearing from us shortly on that. And next we'll get to our Q&A portion of the forum. We have received a couple of questions. So let's get started. The first question is for Aaron. We received a question about when we would start implementing the phases to transactions.
Yeah, that's a great question. One I realized I forgot to address as I was presenting. So We are hoping to go live with the Phase II transaction restructuring this spring, ideally end of March, early April. As you can imagine, this is a huge undertaking from an administrative perspective for our team. Almost every web page and document we have references our phases, and our goal is to be able to kind of do a clean transition where we move to this new structure. So the rules themselves will be updated, non-substantive updates, of course. We would not be changing any rule requirements as part of this process. The supporting documentation, the analysis and planning guides, the FAQs, all of our communications will be updated, as well as our communications out to the industry. So you will certainly know once we get closer to our kind of go live date on this, but we are working diligently behind the scenes to make all of these updates. And if any of you have any thoughts or feedback on this process or how to ensure that it's seamless for the industry, we are certainly all ears.
Thank you, Erin. I've got another question for you, Erin. It's on the Phase 4 update, and the question specific to the 90% requirement. So doesn't the 90% requirement with the 278 rules eliminate the predictability, dependability that comes with required timelines?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the 90% requirement is similar across all of our infrastructure rules for response times. The purpose of this requirement is really to allow for those instances where there are system updates, downtimes, and scheduled downtimes, as well as particularly more complicated prior authorization cases that may require that extra time for analysis. But 90% of the time to have a consistent response time frame is vastly better than what the industry is experiencing now. So we truly believe that this will bring good progress and consistency.
Thank you, Erin. The next question I think is for you, Rachel. Will CORE be developing metrics for the pilots? Will the metrics be the same for all pilots?
Yeah, great question. So in general, at a high level, the measures of success that we would look at across pilot groupings and pilot projects will be similar. Of course, there will be some variation based on it depends on kind of if it's in option 1 versus option 2 and sort of participating with us on this. Your organization may already have established measures of success. That being said, overall, the measures of success are actually going to be pretty similar to some of the cost savings, projected annual savings, time saved type measures that we have that we use in our CAQH index. We've found just across the board that those are some of the most helpful, really higher level measures of success. In addition, we're taking it one level deeper, working with organizations to develop some change measures that we can track through these pilots that are specific to PA. Items like turnaround time, error rates, looking at how it impacts claims outcomes later on, kind of real-time approvals versus pens. So we're taking that kind of a layer deeper, and that's a big part of why we started this initiative. As much as possible, based on the organizations that are working with us and engaging with us on pilots, we are looking to kind of aggregate and look across and have similar measures, just while still, of course, respecting the fact that there is going to be variation across the individual pilot groupings.
And I'm going to interrupt right now and take this as an opportunity to plug the new CAQH index, which came out last week. We are really excited. There was a webinar last week, but there'll be lots of other opportunities to hear about the new data coming out of the index. But also, even more importantly, I know that we're almost starting recruiting season for submission of data for next year's index. So if your organization has not yet participated in the index or is considering continued participation, we would strongly encourage it. We have great data collection tools to support your efforts, and everything that you're able to submit helps us provide a more robust set of data for the next report. So just put that little plug in there now.
Thank you, Erin. So we have a couple of questions that are about joining work groups. So the first question is it possible to be involved in more than one work group? Is there a way to have it be sort of matrix so folks can do more than one?
Yeah, so our work groups are open to all core participating organizations, and organizations can have as many individuals on the work groups as they would like. Organizations themselves only get one vote in straw polls and ballots, so you'll have to coordinate with your colleagues. We do not hold work group meetings at the same time, so as long as your schedule allows it, you can participate in as many core work groups as you are interested in. Now, we would also ask that you think about who at your organization is the subject matter expert on whichever topic is being covered by the work group. We know some people just want to be in a listen-only mode to monitor what's going on in the industry, but the true value of the work group comes from those that would be the implementers of the rule requirements, vetting the requirements, providing feedback, so we have the strongest set of requirements once we get to the point of publication.
And also, we do have the primary representative role, which I know many of you are the primary representatives for your organization. If you're asking yourself, who is my primary representative, definitely just shoot us an email to the core inbox, and we can let you know, because also that person can help may be able to tell you who's, we can also tell you who's in the other groups, but that person can also help kind of guide, if there are limited resources within an organization, kind of help prioritize.
Thank you, Rachel. And then there was another question regarding joining the various work groups. If someone's not a subject matter expert and doesn't have executive sponsorship, are there work groups they can still join, or is that a requirement?
Yeah, as I said, there's no restrictions on who can join the work groups. As I said, there are individuals who are just listening to learn also, and that's great as well. We would encourage you to speak to your leadership about the work groups and the work that is being done, because once it comes time for the voting process and for organizations to take a position on whether or not they support the rule requirements, it's much easier to have that conversation if your leadership is aware of the development process when it begins.
Thanks, Erin. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. So we wanted to share our upcoming webinars and conference presentations. One thing to highlight is, I know Taha talked about recertification. We will be going a little bit more in depth on that and other new features of core certification at that March webinar. And next slide. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today and support us throughout the year. And we hope you have a great afternoon.